Hopefully you can all see my screen, just showing a title slide. And as I say, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, or depending on where you are in the world this morning or this evening. This is week 2 of our new weekly webinar training series, our tea break series. I've got my cup of tea just out of shot here. And this week we're going to be doing a bit of a walkthrough in terms of creating line charts. If you weren't here with us last week, just a reminder that on the call with us today, we've got a couple of members of our customer success team. We've got Louisa and Ilias today. They're available through the chat window. They'll be happy to answer off any of your questions, take any of your feedback, or just to say hi to you if you're someone that they're used to working with on a daily basis. A big thank you from us for taking time out of your day to be with us here today. We want to be as helpful as we can to you. Please use the chat window so we can make ourselves as useful as possible. Right, let's get underway. What are we going to look at in today's little half-hour session? So I thought what would be useful would be to do a bit of hands-on chart creation based on 2 different data sets. And I thought that would be a nice way of just looking at a few really basic considerations when putting together line charts and some of the features that are available to you within Flourish to do that. Not all of them are immediately obvious, so this seemed like a good opportunity to point that out to you. First, before I do that, I wanted to share this with you. So as I was putting this session together, I was thinking what's going to be more useful, kind of best practices or just some hands-on stuff. I decided hands-on, and actually my colleague Lindsay is going to be doing a session later in the series on best practices with charts and data storytelling. So I think she'll cover a lot of this there. But I found this really fun resource that I wanted to share with you, Room for Improve, the line chart edition. I'm not going to go through it in depth here. Obviously, we'll provide this link afterwards. But it's just a really nice sort of step through, starting from this admittedly extremely ugly line chart example, and then slide by slide, it steps you through, if you like, a breakdown of this chart and the different things to consider. So, you know, removing the 3D, removing the background and so on. As I say, it starts from quite an extreme sort of place. But what I think you might find is just in 2 or 3 minutes, flicking through here, it can give you a nice overview of some of the things that you should be thinking about when you're designing your line charts, and it does it in just a really nice, easily sort of digestible style. So check that out after the webinar. I think you'll find that quite useful, hopefully. Okay, where I wanted to start today, though, is with a walkthrough. And the first data set that we're going to be looking at will be familiar to those of you who were on the call last week. It's UK energy trends from 1995 to 2019. And I've got that data set here ready for me in Excel, really nice and simple. I've got my years here and my series and values here. So I'm just going to copy that into my clipboard as my starting point. Okay, and now let me just open up my Flourish workspace and go to a line chart. So into my template chooser, open up my blueprint for my line chart. Just so that we make this look pretty, I'm going to change this to our Kiln Candy theme, which Louisa designs. I think it's all going to look nice. So let's get rid of the sample data. Let's put my data in. Let's just take out this empty column and let's remove this row. Let's call this date. And now let's bind my columns. So I've got data in columns B to H. So there we go. Great. There's my line chart. Now the first kind of really obvious kind of question around here, just on a very simple level, is like, really what is it we're trying to show and wanting to direct our audience towards? So I say Lindsay's going to cover this with you in more depth, but this is a good example where we've got the total here and then values for each of these categories. And I really think we want to be showing, you know, either one or other of those things, either the total like this and just focusing on that, or the categories. And I actually just want to look at each of those categories. I'm going to remove that entirely. So basically, real simple level, thinking about what it is that we want to sort of focus on in my in our charting. I then wanted to pick out this for you here, which is my chart starting from 1994 and going to 2020. But my dates actually start from 1995 to 2019. And I can imagine a few people being a little bit kind of confused by this possibly. So I wanted to just sort of show you what's happening, which is Flourish is essentially kind of doing its best to round up your series here and round it out to a whole series, which you may or may not want. I'm not sure that I do want it here. So what I'm going to do is drop down into the x-axis here. And in my x-axis settings, hopefully you can see I've got this configure default max min. So I'm going to open that up. And you can see I've got this round min max setting, a little description of how it works. And at the moment it's on. And if I turn it off, you're going to see my chart now runs 1994 to 2019, which I prefer for this, so I'm going to stick with it. Just to sort of explain this in a little bit more detail, I put together this little sort of canned example where my data series starts here, a bit strangely, in the middle of the month, 15th of January. This is just dummy data, and runs through until the 13th of October, so today's date. And with that rounding on, we can see Flourish is rounding this x-axis out to the beginning of the month here and the end of the month here, which might actually be kind of quite useful. So that's what that sort of setting is doing. So let's change that so we don't have that on. Let's maybe now label up the axes here. So the y-axis, what is this value? We don't really know. I've got it written here, just so I can copy and paste it. It's millions of tons of oil equivalent. So I'm going to find my x-axis and put that in my axis title there. So that's going to be pretty key to my user understanding what's going on. So I'm labeling my y-axis here. What about my x-axis? Well, these are years or dates. So I can put dates in here. Something I would suggest sort of thinking about is there really any value to that? As you saw, we've sort of taken up some space for our chart by putting that in there. We've introduced a lot of white space down the bottom, and we're looking at time series data, and we've got years here. I think it's sort of fairly obvious, hopefully, to the viewer that these are dates. So I don't think that's going to add in too much more. So I'm actually going to kind of leave that out. Okay, next up, let's focus up here on our legend. So we've got a legend, and I wanted to point out a few things to you just in case you weren't already aware that these options are available to you. So by default, our legend mode is in auto. Let me just switch it to off. That's nice and simple, no legend, or back on again. There it is. And we've got another feature here, which is click legend to filter data. Let me just first switch this now to off. Off, if I click these, nothing's going to happen, okay? And then if I do want it to click to select, so I've got two options, single select and multi-select. And you can also think of this really as either sort of filter in or filter out. So if I go to multi-select, if I click on coal, it takes it out. So here I can have multiple values and I can remove. I think what would make more sense for this data set is a single select, where if I select coal, I'm then only looking at coal and I can see the trend of coal production much more clearly. Or if I switch to bioenergy, I can see that trend much more clearly. So I'm going to have my legend on, and I'm going to have it in single select. Now, it may not be obvious to your viewer at all that this is, you know, a control of sorts as well as being a legend. So if we are going to do something like that, I'd really advise you to make sure you guide your viewer to that functionality. So I'm just going to do that here in the header. I'm just going to go over to my notepad just to save myself a little bit of typing. I'm going to give a title to my chart. And for the purposes of this demo, I want the function of this chart to be that the audience can look at all of these together or can filter down to look at the trend of any one of these particular categories. There are a number of other things that we could do with this chart, and we'll be looking at that in a session on stories. But that's what I want to show today. So I've guided my view as that. Click on any category in the legend below to view in isolation. So we've got that there. And something I also wanted to sort of point out here is that when I do filter down to a single category, you might see my y-axis update there. So if I just go back to all of them, my y-axis is at 160. My top value here is 150. When I go down to coal, the highest value is 32.8. So we've got a top point of our y-axis of 35. And that allows us to view the trend more clearly. If you don't want that type of functionality happening when you're sort of filtering, it is possible to prevent that. Let me just close a few of these dialog boxes here, and I can go to my y-axis settings here. And as you can see, I've got a min-max setting. And if, for example, I were to make the maximum setting of 160 here, now that is effectively going to be sort of hard-coded into this chart. So here, if I click on coal, the axis doesn't update here, or bioenergy, oh, double click there, single click, again, the axis doesn't update. So that's how you can fix that axis. But for the purposes of this chart, I don't want that, so I'm just going to remove that. Now, one of the things that we looked at last week was a new function in column charts, bar charts and pie charts to order your data by datasheet value or label. And you may have noticed that my legend here is not really in any order. You know, this is not in any sort of particular sequence. So I might want to put this in order, for example, alphabetical order. So how can I do that within the context of line chart? Because if I just sort of scroll up here, you'll see I don't have those same sorting options. Well, there's two different ways I can do it. I can change my column bindings here. So I want the values in B to G, but I don't necessarily need to set them in that order. So if I take that out here, and then I could quickly do this in alphabetical order, which I think would be E, comma B, comma D, comma F, comma C, comma G. And I hope you'll excuse me if I get my alphabetical orders wrong on a demo. Does this look right? Okay, that looks about right. So now we can see those are in alphabetical order. So you can bind your columns in different orders, and that's worth knowing. But let me just reset that to show you the other way that you can do that specifically in the context of the legend here. So I'm just going to reset that to B to G. So these are now not really in any particular order. And if I open up my legend settings again, down the bottom here, you'll see that I've got a custom order override. So here now I can again kind of hard code into the chart the order I want the legend in. So let's just have here nuclear, for example, if you want that first, let's put that. And that should have done that. What have I done wrong? B through to G. Let's just try that a little bit different here. Oh, there we go. It was just being a bit slow to update. So there we go, nuclear, and for example, coal. We can put that in there. So we can use that to do a custom order. If you are using this, a tip would be, and there's lots of places in Flourish where this is the case, copy your values directly out of your data sheet, because otherwise it's very easy to get things wrong. So let's just get these into some shape, and then just by doing a bit of cutting and pasting, I should be able to get these back into an alphabetical order fairly quickly. Let's have a look. Okay, there we go, and now those are in alphabetical order, so we can do it that way. The reason why I say always make sure you copy and paste, it's very easy if you're typing to do something like this. I actually did this when I was practicing this earlier, is type natural gas like that. And then if you do that, let's just see if we can zoom out here. My browser's a little bit stuck. It's not going to appear at all. So that's why it's always safest to copy and paste to avoid those little mistakes. A couple of other settings to show you. Consider whether your grid lines are adding much to your chart. If you don't feel that they are, then you can just turn them off here. So that's turned those grid lines off entirely. Or you can also fix the number of grid lines if you want. And that's a little bit hidden. It's actually in this ticks and labels section. So I'm just going to turn these back on, go to ticks and labels styling. And here, now in these advanced settings, all the way down here, we've got ticks to show, and we can actually fix this at a number. So for example, if I want there to be loads of these, I can set that to 15. If I really think we're better off with just a couple of these, I can set that down to 3. So that's where that sort of setting lives. And then the final thing that I wanted to sort of show you on this particular chart is obviously always a good idea to put your source in, and then you can hyperlink to that source. So that lives down here in footer. You can see I've got a section here for my source name. Just going to go to my notepad so I don't have to do too much typing. So the source of this data set is actually the UK government, and I pulled it directly off their website. So let's grab that hyperlink there and put that into the source URL. And now that little source at the bottom links through to the actual source of the raw data. Okay, so a few little things to have shown you there on that energy data set. I'm now going to switch to a different data set just to show you a couple of other things to kind of keep in mind when working on your line charts. So here now, this is the other data set that we also looked at last week. This is from the World Bank. This is GDP per country. And as we can see, something like 268 countries and regions here, so lots and lots of data, and I think about sort of 60 years. Let me first grab that. I'm just going to copy that into my clipboard. I'm going to go to new visualization, and I'm going to choose a line chart. Okay, so the first things that I'm going to mention, a couple of things I mentioned last week, but really to me, very, very key and always worth bearing in mind. First thing is, does my data look like the blueprint data? Okay, so I've got my dates running down here in a single column and my series in columns running along the top. My World Bank data doesn't actually look like that. So I go up to the top here, we can see I've got my dates in columns, and actually my countries are all in a single column here. All right, so that's going to be important that I remember that. That's not the right format. The other thing that's important to remember is this is quite a large data set, so we want to make sure that Flourish is a little bit kind of constrained when trying to deal with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove my values before I copy this data set in. And I'm going to set a control here. So I'm going to open up controls and filters. I'm going to choose multi-select, and I'm going to choose 5 here. And actually, I think that maybe not going to stick. Let's just see. I'm just going to copy my data in here. Okay, so here's my data. And as I said, this isn't the right format, but luckily with this particular data set, it's relatively easy to get it into the right format. I'm just going to get rid of a couple of extraneous columns there, and then I'm going to swap my rows and my columns. And now hopefully we're going to see this data appear in a format that's much more friendly for this particular template. I think that's probably might be just going to take a minute. There we go, that's done that. And I'm now ready to sort of put my values in. Before I do, I'm just going to go over here and make sure, yep, I've got my controls and filters on. So I'm only going to show a maximum of 5, and my values are here in B through to JE. B through JE. Okay, so Flourish has gone a little bit slow here. So I think I might not have put my control on properly. Oh, look, I haven't set that. So Flourish is going to struggle here. And we might have to begin this example again due to user error. Let's just make sure we get this down to 5. There we go. And Flourish is going to start to cope a lot better once we're only showing 5 on here. Let's get our multi-select in there. There we go. That sort of tied it up. So inadvertently, bit of presenter error there, but showed you the reason why we're trying to make sure we don't bind too much data is Flourish becomes very, very sluggish. So now we've only got 5 lines. It's a bit more manageable. Okay, so what else do we want to look at now we've got our data in here? So I thought this was a good opportunity to show you formatting your numbers. We got these very large numbers to deal with here on our y-axis and also sort of here in this pop-up. So we might want to use something like this number and date formatting section. So we use number and date formatting, and we can see here, we've got this advanced setting. So I'm going to open this up here. And be careful here to make sure you do it on your main number styling if you're working a single axis chart as we are here. And I've got the ability to multiply and divide values. So I'm going to choose that, and then I'm going to divide these values, and I'm going to divide them by 1 billion. And my numbers are then going to be a little bit more manageable. Okay, so there we are. I can see I've just got a little bit of data here to get rid of to clean that up. It doesn't look like I successfully removed. Let's just remove that. Okay, and these numbers are a little bit tidier, and these numbers are also sort of a bit more manageable within the pop-ups. I might perhaps want a couple of additional decimal places. If I do, I can control that here. So we've got some more decimal places now, and we can also put a suffix in if we want. So we might put in billions, for example. We can see that appear there and there. And what you can see is actually this all runs together. It looks a little bit ugly, so I might want to put space billions in there. And that's going to be a little bit kind of cleaner. So we can reformat our numbers if we want to make things a little bit more sort of manageable like that. Another setting that I wanted to make aware to you is Flourish's ability to handle missing data and a couple of different options around that. So if I look, for example, here at Afghanistan, we can see actually in this data set, we're missing some data here from, it looks like 1981 to 2001 approximately is missing. And you can see by default, Flourish is interpolating that. So it's filling in the gaps essentially to give a continuous line. And I think it's probably sort of fairly obvious looking at this that there's missing data here. But if we look at a different country, so perhaps someone like Djibouti, here, everything looks good, doesn't look like we're missing any data. Actually, for Djibouti, we are missing some data for 1986. It's not immediately obvious and would be even less obvious if we had several other lines on the chart at this particular point. So what we can do if we want is open up our lines, dots, and areas section here and go to gaps in line. And then that's a little bit clearer. And the example I showed a minute ago, Afghanistan, will display like that. So it's a bit clearer that we're looking at some missing values within our time series here. Let's just choose a couple of different countries. Let's do some good countries for suitable comparisons. I'm going to do France, Germany, United Kingdom. And I wanted to highlight our ability to add highlights to our axes here, which can be really sort of useful. So in the context of this data, I might want to mark out a particular notable sort of point in time, for example, the financial crisis. So I can do that using highlights on the x-axis here. Just open that up. And then the way this works is I'm going to type in what I want to sort of write in terms of my highlight or annotation. So I'm going to call this financial crisis. Then colon, colon, and then the value along here that I want this line to appear at, and the value in this case is 2008. And now I can put a line there and I can mark out kind of timelines here. So I could do a second one as well. I could do this COVID, and we could do this, for example, let's just say COVID was 2018, just so that this aligns with actually where we've got data for. Oh, we don't have data, there we go. And we can put sort of multiple lines there. Let's take that out. So we can do single line kind of annotations or highlights along the axes there, but we can also do a range to mark out a period in time. So I'm just actually going to take this out. And I'm going to put financial crisis. And actually, perhaps my definition of the financial crisis is a longer period starting in 2007 and then running through to, for which I'm just going to use these little arrows here. 2011. And then now that time period is highlighted here. You can see I've got some controls as well, so I could drop that label down there where it's going to be a little bit more readable. If I wanted to sort of draw attention to this more, I can put that in red. I can change the opacity, so that's going to be very obtrusive, obviously, or I can make it really very faint indeed using something like 0.05. So that's very, very subtle. So some nice options available to you there, and you can also do those along the y-axis. Okay, next up, I wanted to highlight something. I'm just going to switch back to my slide deck here. I think we've run through all of these points, so I'm going to skip past these areas of the slides to talk very briefly about linear or logarithmic scale, because using a logarithmic scale for your y-axis can be really useful if we're comparing values or trends where those values cover a very, very large range. And instead of a linear scale where we're going up in sequential value 1, 2, 3, 4, and the gaps between those numbers are all the same, logarithmic is non-linear, and so we're going up by a set scale. So it might be going up in multiples of 10. So the range between the numbers 10 and 100 is the same range, and the next range up is between 100 and 1000. And as we'll see, this allows us to run comparisons where there's quite a sort of discrepancy in the values within the data. So let's have an example of this here in this particular chart. So when I look at Germany, France, and the UK from a GDP perspective, these are broadly similar in terms of their total value. So this perhaps makes sense to use a linear scale. But it might be a valid use case for a user to want to compare South Africa and the trends in South Africa with, say, Mozambique, which is a relatively near geographic neighbour. But obviously the GDP of South Africa is very, very much higher. So this is rather sort of dwarfed on the chart, and it makes this quite difficult for us to sort of see how these trends compare. So looking at this, obviously it looks like South Africa's had a very steep, sharp decline in GDP in the early 2010s through to the mid part of the 2010s, and that's perhaps not been so pronounced here in Mozambique. Well, actually, if we sort of switch this, opening up our y-axis to a logarithmic scale, we can see those trends a little bit more clearly. And actually, we can see that for Mozambique, for example, actually, there was a very sort of precipitous fall in GDP from 2015 to 2016, something like 25% of GDP, whereas in South Africa, that value that really looked much steeper on the linear scale is not so significant overall, kind of relative to previous year's figures. So switching between those can allow us to make those visual comparisons more easily. And then what you might want to do in the case of an example chart like this, where we're deliberately allowing our users to explore the data, is leave it set to a linear y-axis, but here within controls and filters, use this other control to show the logarithmic control for the y-axis. So now we're putting that in front of the user. So now we just run that again. If our user or our viewer is looking at Germany, United Kingdom, and France, this all makes sense. That's great. Linear scale works. If they're wanting to compare, just to give that same example, South Africa and Mozambique, there we go. Seeing that the linear is not perhaps suitable, we can switch there to the logarithmic scale. So definitely something for you to sort of think about that control if there's a lot of discrepancies in the values within your data set. And then the final thing that I wanted to focus on in this example was just the legend here. So we looked at the legend in the context of our energy data, but I want to ask how helpful our legend is being to us here within this context. If we're sort of swapping around a lot between various different countries, it's going to be quite a sort of cognitive burden on us, looking back and forth from this legend, trying to work out which one of these are which. I'm just going to get rid of this for now. looking between which one of these are which. Do you sort of instinctively know which these are? Not that easy to tell. And also, obviously, we've got quite a large sort of data series here. We're going to have a problem with clashing colors a lot. So if I filter this down to, let's say, Bahrain, Belarus, Argentina, and Barbados, this problem is even worse. Oh no, I've got 4 different quite similar shades of green. So really it's very difficult to know what's going on here. So I question how useful the legend is now in this chart. So we can maybe kind of turn that off. And what we might want to use in its stead is actually labels. So if I open up my labels section here and turn this option on to show labels on lines, we should now see some labels appear. And it looks like they've appeared in slightly the wrong place. I'll just refresh that and see if we can get that working. Okay. So what I'm going to do, as I've done something a little bit wrong here, is just quickly recreate that chart to show you that in action, because I've messed up with one of my settings there. So let me just show you that point again. Get rid of that. Let's just quickly grab this data. Apologies for the slight delay here. Get rid of that. Pop my data back in here. I'm going to need, unfortunately, to transpose this again. Get rid of that. Do a quick transposition of my data. Okay, that's now looking more like it. I'll just use a few columns here just to make this quicker. So we'll just do B to F. Won't put all of our data on the chart. There we go. And I'm going to open up labels here, show labels on lines, and there we go. We can now see those labels that are there. And you can make these obviously smaller or much bigger. If you do make them bigger, of course, you're going to need to give them more space to play in. So you can do that opening this out. And that's going to give you more padding here on the right. So with a data set like this, I say sort of think about using labels on your lines there. And apologies for just making a little error in that demo. And then the final thing that I wanted to touch on today before we run out of time is a special little treat for you to say thank you for coming along to today's session, which is a sneak preview of some forthcoming functionality. So this is something that our development team are working hard on at the moment. It's been much requested, and we think it's going to be a very useful sort of feature for you all, and that is annotations. So the ability within the line_bar_py template to add much richer annotations so that you can better explain your data and your insights to your audience. So it's not quite ready yet. We're still working on some final UX and bug fixes for it. But I wanted to just give you, as I say, a little sneak preview of how that might work. So when it is released, it will be working in story mode. So here's my chart that we've been looking at earlier of UK Energy. And now what I'm going to be able to do is add in things like this, a line with an arrow, for example, pointing to a specific data point where we can then add in a descriptive annotation saying what's of interest here. And there'll be a number of different sort of variants on that. So you could use a circular marker like this. You can actually use no marker at all if you want to use annotations just to do better labeling. And you can use something like this, which is a clickable dialog box. And you can then even put multiple clickable dialog boxes in there as well. So if you're really wanting to do a better job of kind of describing your charts and the data within them, then we hope that annotations is going to be a really useful forthcoming feature for you to do that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. that's a wrap for today. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you for, I can see there have been lots of questions within the chat window, so thanks also for that. If you have any questions that haven't been covered off today, or any feedback on either today's session or future things that you'd like us to cover, do please feel free to write to us at the usual channel, prioritysupport@flourish.studio. We'd love to hear from you. But until then, we'll look forward to seeing you next week, and hopefully at subsequent weeks of this training webinar series. Thank you very much, everybody, and wishing you a very nice rest of the day.